NATO's eastern flank is moving from words to action. Countries closest to Russia are preparing concrete steps to strengthen defense against what they openly call a long-term threat. The announcement comes ahead of a summit in Helsinki next week, hosted by Finland. Leaders from Finland, Sweden, Poland and the Baltic states, Romania and Bulgaria will discuss joint defense projects and how to fund them. The focus is clear: air defense, border security, counter-drone systems and stronger ground forces. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo says pressure from Russia is already being felt and will not disappear anytime soon. Eastern Europe, he warns, is on the front line. The group wants to send a clear signal to Brussels and secure funding. An initial 1.5 billion euros could be allocated soon, with much larger sums planned in the EU's next long-term budget starting in 2027. Finland, which shares a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, has already begun preparing its defenses, underscoring how seriously the region views the threat. European foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to show support for Ukraine as pressure from Washington grows to quickly accept a US-brokered peace deal. The talks come after a meeting in Berlin between US envoys and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Now Europe is trying to reassert its role, arguing that the future of Ukraine is not just about territory, but about Europe's own security. European officials say the continent cannot stay on the sidelines, especially when Russian frozen assets are largely held in Europe. Several ministers stressed that Europe must be part of shaping a just and lasting peace. At the same time, Washington is pushing for faster decisions while negotiations face serious obstacles. The question of security guarantees for Ukraine remains central, especially as discussions continue around NATO and possible alternatives. Denmark's foreign minister says the coming days are critical not only for Ukraine but for Europe's credibility as a global actor.
I think it's crunch time for Europe and Ukraine. We have been discussing this for quite a while. In the lead up to last weekend, we took a very important decision about stabilizing the mobilization of the Russian assets. It's a precondition for the next step, which is a reparation loan, and we must take that decision within the end of this week to secure that Ukraine is in a position to continue its freedom fight, but also to uphold, the whole society, but also in order to show the rest of the world that Europe is a strong player. Otherwise, we will give in to the impression pictured or painted by the American president that Europe is weak.
Talks between Ukraine and its Western partners are turning into a struggle, even without Russia at the table. According to the Wall Street Journal, senior officials from President Trump's team held 2 days of talks with President Zelenskyy and European leaders. Washington is pushing Kyiv to accept a peace deal with Russia before the end of the year, while Ukraine and its European allies say key disagreements remain unresolved. The main dispute is over territory. Ukraine refuses to withdraw its troops from parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions it still controls. European and Ukrainian officials also want the United States to clearly explain what it would do if Russia violates a ceasefire and attacks again. These issues are expected to dominate talks in Berlin. President Trump did not attend and instead sent his envoys to Witkow and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. Witkow has been moving between Moscow, Kyiv and European capitals in recent weeks. Russian officials say the US peace plan could be a basis for talks, but it is unclear whether Moscow would accept it. Many European leaders believe Russia does not want to end the war and warned that a Russian victory in Ukraine could threaten NATO countries next. The US plan reportedly includes a provision asking Ukraine to stop fighting for the occupied territories. That could mean Washington effectively accepting Russia's annexation and could further block Ukraine's path to NATO. In return, Russia could be brought back into part of the global economy. President Zelenskyy said he is disappointed that peace talks are being driven by power, not by values or international law. He argues the most fair option would be negotiations based on the current front line, with any withdrawal happening on both sides. While some US officials claim Ukraine cannot sustain the war, Ukrainian and European officials believe Kyiv can defend itself for at least another year if military and financial support continues. European countries, including Britain and France, have prepared detailed plans for future assistance and possible security deployments. These plans were shared with the US military officials, but Washington has not yet made a political decision. With NATO membership effectively blocked, Zelenskyy is now focused on binding security guarantees from the US and Europe. Moscow, however, has already warned it would strongly oppose such proposals, including any demilitarized zone in eastern Ukraine. Residents in several Russian cities woke up without electricity, heating, or water after a large overnight drone attack. Russian media reports that drones targeted Moscow and a number of other regions, including Rostov, Astrakhan, and Belgorod. Explosions were heard in and around the Russian capital, while energy and infrastructure facilities were hit in other cities. Moscow's mayor claimed that air defense shot down 18 drones over the city. Because of the attack, Moscow's Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports briefly suspended flights. In southern Russia, the government of the Rostov region said drone attacked multiple cities and districts overnight. Soon after, local residents reported that part of Rostov were left without heating after a power plant stopped working. In Belgorod, a drone reportedly hit the power plant. Parts of the city remain without electricity. There are also reports of a fire at the Astrakhan gas processing plant. NASA satellite data detected a blaze near sulfur storage facilities at the plant overnight, suggesting possible damage. Russian officials have not provided full details about the consequences of the attacks. As usual, independent confirmation is limited. These strikes follow a series of recent drone attacks deep inside Russia, including earlier incidents in Saratov and Grozny, where drones hit oil facilities and government buildings. Europe can no longer rely on the old world order. That was the clear message from German's chancellor Friedrich Merz. Speaking at a party conference in Munich, Merz said that the decades of what Europe once called Pax Americana are largely over. The United States, he said, is now focused first and foremost on its own interests, and Europe must do the same. Merz warned that Russia's war against Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. According to the German chancellor, dictator Putin is trying to redraw Europe's borders and revive the Soviet empire. And if Ukraine falls, he said, Russia will not stop there. Merz has become one of the key European leaders pushing for stronger support for Ukraine alongside France and the United Kingdom. His remarks come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and US envoys arrive in Berlin for another round of talks aimed at ending the war. Russia denies plans to attack Europe or restore the Soviet Union, but in Berlin the message was blunt. Europe must prepare for a long and dangerous confrontation.
The decades of the Pax Americana are largely over for us in Europe, and for us in Germany as well. It no longer exists as we knew it. And nostalgia doesn't help either. And I would be one of the last people who would not like to indulge in this nostalgia. But it's no use. That's the way it is. The Americans are now very, very tough in pursuing their own interests. And that can only mean one thing, that we now have to pursue our own interests too.
Russia wants its money back. Europe says no. Russia's central bank has filed a massive lawsuit against Euroclear, demanding almost $230 billion in frozen assets. The claim was submitted to a Moscow court. According to Russian media, the amount is 11.2 trillion rubles, money that belongs to Russia's central bank but has been frozen in Europe since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Moscow calls Euroclear's actions illegal and complains about plans by the European Commission to use the frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. But the timing matters. Just days earlier, EU ambassadors agreed to freeze Russian assets indefinitely. That means Russia will not get this money back. Not now, not later, and not through the back door. The EU's ambassador to Ukraine confirmed it clearly. Russia has no access to its frozen central bank assets in Europe. That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.